This is Nicholas Alexiou from Department of Sociology, Queen's College, and the Hellenic American Project's Diaspora Center. Today, we are very pleased to have an oral history interview with Ms. HILARY SIDERIS. Today, it is October 15, 2020, and the Hellenic American Project Diaspora Center continues to have interviews for the oral history archives, and this is part of the COVID-19 series. Hilary, thank you very much for agreeing to have this interview with us and include your interview to this project for CUNY and Queen's College. And please tell us a few things about you and the family background to begin with.
Okay, sure. So my name's HILARY SIDERIS, and I was born in Warsaw, Indiana. It's a very small town in the vicinity of South Bend and Fort Wayne, Indiana. My grandmother came from Chios, and my grandfather came from an area near Smyrna, or what's today Izmir. My grandmother, I think, only completed grade school, and from what I can understand from the records that I found, it seems that my grandfather did attend college. But they lived in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. That's where my father and his sister were raised. And they seem to have operated a diner and also a shoe repair and some other businesses. It wasn't totally clear, but I did find through Ancestry that the address of the shoe repair, which I thought was interesting because my family on the Greek side never shared any of that about the shoe repair. I think maybe they were a little bit embarrassed about having, started in such a humble way. They liked to show that they were educated and middle class. I didn't know my grandfather, who died before I was born, but I did get to know my yaya when I was a teenager. She came to live with us, and she didn't speak English very well. We communicated, but in a very basic way. She spoke Greek to my father. But my father didn't really have any interest in showing us what it meant to be Greek or exploring, his Greek identity. It was always very clear to us that we were half Greek, and we sort of had a line down the middle, and we never considered ourselves to be Greek. So whereas my cousins, who they did grow up in a family they had Greek parents on both sides. They went to the Greek Orthodox Church. So they were much more involved in a Greek American community. I mean, we were not involved at all, basically.
So when the grandparents came, they came as a young woman and a young boy, probably. And this is the early 1920s, going to Pennsylvania. How come they went there? Did they know anyone? Do you know the conditions under which they came? They just bought tickets to the boat and came. It was a community there. It was family members or some other people from their villages.
It may be that my grandfather had some cousins or family who were in Bethlehem. I know that my grandfather, I recently found out that he was more or less a refugee, because at that time there was that ethnic purification going on in Turkey, and they I know that they took his land. I think he had some farm land, or he raised some animals. And I found out, like, kind of by accident through my aunt, that he left. I mean, things were on fire when he left. It was chaos when he left, and so he came here earlier. I think he was born at the end of the 19th century. He came earlier, and then my grandmother came, and she was younger. So they came separately. I don't know if their families knew each other, and that's how they decided, to get married. There's a lot of stuff that's very, unclear.
It is very interesting. This period you mentioned is historically and scholarly is known as the Asia Minor catastrophe, the burning of Smyrna by the Turks in 1922, and it is one of the most serious issues in modern Greek history. So it is very understandable. So the family has roots in America more than 100 years, more than a century probably. So, the family goes back among to the pioneering era. And of course, it was very typical. The trade that Greeks had with the sous or the diners, the small shops they had. And then the movement from Pennsylvania to Indiana, it is very interesting also. Again, it was a movement because other co-villagers or friends moved there. What was the decision to move deeper into the West of America?
Well, I guess I should also add, just because it's an interesting detail, that my grandfather was a cantor in the Greek Orthodox Church, and he was also a teacher. I think that he taught in an afternoon program, or a Greek school for Greek American kids, which my father had was forced to attend after school, and my sister. And my aunt. My father joined the Navy when he was very young. I think he was trying to get away from home. He was trying to, be independent. He joined, I don't know if he was 18. He didn't serve in World War II, but he served on the Navy baseball team. He was a very good athlete, and he was a very good baseball player. And so he was on this Navy League team throughout the war. So he didn't actually see any battle. And then after that, he was able to go to college. He went to Lehigh University, which is very next to or in Bethlehem, perhaps. And I think after that, he started to, go into a business career, and that took him to different parts of the country. So he lived in California, Texas, various places. He met my mother in Texas. And then he got a job offer in Warsaw, trying to remember the name of the company. But he always had sort of executive jobs, and then eventually later he sold insurance. But I think that he really would have liked to be a teacher. But that wasn't really an option for him. I think he was always probably told that he should go into business. So that's what he did.
Both of your parents were American born.
Yes.
First generation American born. Very, very interesting. And growing up in a household, you had the taste of Greek food, music, records, or newspapers, language?
No, I think one thing that we did have was we had the food, because my mother, became a cook and actually became a chef and eventually opened a restaurant of her own. But that was years later. But when we were broke.
In Indiana, she opened the place?
Yes, it was in Warsaw, Indiana. And she operated, it was a very nice, kind of elegant restaurant. She operated it for about 10 years. She had always wanted to be a chef, and she kind of learned on her own. But one thing that she was very attracted to was she got very interested in Greek cooking. And I should say I was born in Warsaw, but I spent the early part of my childhood in Indianapolis, which was much more cosmopolitan, shall we say, where there were Greek Americans. There was a Greek American community there, and there were stores where you could go and buy, phyllo. You could buy the ingredients for Greek cooking, and my mother was really interested in learning how to do Greek cooking. Partly, I think she wanted to compete with my grandmother because she was very competitive, but I think she was also just interested in the culture and sort of fascinated about, learning to cook in a new way. And so she did, and I do remember that we often had, like, I don't know if they would be considered authentic in Greece. I don't know if Greeks would say that's pasticcio, but that's what we. And it was tasty. It was probably my mother's version of pasticcio we had. And we also had a lot of cookies, the Greek kouliaraika, and the ones that are shaped but like the crescent.
Kurabiedes.
Rabietes. Yeah, so we had the Greek cookies, the Greek dolmades. My mother would sort of compare hers with my grandmother's, my poor grandmother, because she really didn't need any more competition from my mother. But so the food, yes, but that was really my mother doing that, who took a great interest in that. We didn't know anything about the church, the music, or family stories.
As a child, you had a chance to visit Greece or the family who they were visiting?
No, unfortunately, no. The closest we got was visiting our relatives in Pennsylvania, who at one point my grandmother lived in a kind of apartment complex where a lot of the other families and older women, when she was widowed, were Greek. And so she had that community. But no, we never went to Greece. My father never actually had any interest in going to Greece or Europe, and wasn't interested really in traveling. He was a very sort of Midwestern person, conservative, Midwestern, sort of, actually he became an evangelical Christian in the last 20 years of his life. So like a kind of a true Hoosier kind of personality. And I think that was partly because he didn't want to be associated with his immigrant past.
Identity is something very elusive and changing thing, especially ethnic identities. How you identify yourself then and now as an American, as a Greek American, an American Greek? How it is your self concept of ethnic identity?
I identify as a Greek American. I know I am very American. I have learned that in all of my work with people from other countries, other cultures. Since my husband is Italian, I see how, our cultures, there are differences, and it's easy for us to have misunderstandings, because he has one expectation, I have another expectation. So I recognize that I I'm not, I'm not a Greek. You know, I wouldn't say that. I know that when I take an Italian class because I'm very interested in being able to speak better and to read better in Italian, because it's an opportunity I have with my husband. And a lot of the people in the class, they're very well educated people there, but they're Americans. They grew up here and they identify as Italians. And I think that's interesting because I think a similar thing happened to them, that they didn't get to learn the language from their family. They didn't really get to learn the culture. They're really American, but they have this wish, you know, to be Italian. It's something that they try to be. They have that pride now, you know, that their parents or grandparents didn't have. So it's a loss, you know, it's sad, but I feel hopeful that, you know, we can try harder to kind of get back our, you know, our ancestry, our heredity.
Have you ever visited Greece, or you plan to visit Greece? And what is the concept of Greece means to you, knowing that you have a Greek background?
I think to me it means, you know, it's a beautiful place, but it's also rough place. It's also a kind of, there's a harshness to the place, and the beauty is harsh. And you know, I have not been to Greece. I've been to Italy many times, and I'm working on right now, well, once the pandemic is over, getting my husband to do the trip to Greece. There's always a reason to go to Italy because he has relatives there. We know people there. I don't know anyone in Greece. My younger sister went a few years ago, and she said that they went to Chios and that they were really greeted, you know, in an extraordinarily friendly way. So I would love to do that. So it's on my agenda, but I haven't managed to do it yet.
So you have family members or friends who visited Greece, and they had the chance to go back and forth. As far as concerned Italy, also is a similarity in our patterns of immigration. Both Greeks and American and Italians, they immigrated to the States twice in the same century, 1900s and after the war. But Italy has a very interesting distinction between the north and the south. Is your husband's background from the south, which is considered the Magna Graecia. Still, there are communities that speak some dialects of ancient Greek. So there is a similarity between Greek culture and the southern Italian areas. Mm-hmm. Which part of Italy your husband comes from?
Yes, actually, I did the ancestry DNA test, and you know, you can't really put too much faith in that, but it continues to change and get updated as the techniques, I guess, get better. And the latest one, well, the first one I did showed 50% Greek or Italian, since they couldn't differentiate the DNA. And then the most recent one showed a much larger proportion. They identified the Greek part, the Balkan part, and the Italian part. So there's definitely, you know, some Italian DNA in there. And my grandmother or my aunt would tell this story, and I don't know if it's true, that my grandmother's people came originally from Genoa, went to Chios from Genoa. You know, I don't know how far back. I don't know if that's true, but my grandmother's maiden name was Maestros, which is a little bit Italian. And so I'm sure there's there was a lot of interchange and similar
The
DNA.
last US census shows that it's about 1.2 million Americans who identify themselves also as Greeks. And for the first time, there is a demographic transition. The American-born population is larger than the Greek-born. And that signifies different approaches, how the community is organized, the policies, etc. How do you see the future of the Greek American community? And if you see any differences, how the community was when you growing up and how the Greek American community is now, because you live in Brooklyn, which also has a large Greek American population in the areas of Bay Ridge and the surrounding areas. What is your attachment with the community?
I have to say, I don't have a connection to the community other than the the writing community that Dean Kostos sort of put together. Yeah, I would like to have much more of a connection. In the neighborhood where I live in Brooklyn, it's mostly newer immigrants. So I don't see a lot of Greek Americans or Italian Americans here. I see more people from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Orthodox Jews, from all over South America, Mexico, but it's not really part of the neighborhood that I see anyway. So I don't know, I feel like I'm not really equipped to answer that question other than to say it would be great to be more involved in the Greek American literary community in particular.
When did you move to New York, and your engagement with the City University of New York, with CUNY? You want to tell us a few things about that?
I moved to New York so long ago, 1986. So New York was quite different at that time. I came here just because I wanted to be around other writers and have opportunities to go to readings and workshops and be in a place where there are a lot of ideas and people with ideas. The first year I was here, I actually came as a nanny. I worked as a live-in nanny for a couple who had just had a baby. So for a year, lived in their house and took care of their baby. It was sort of starting from nowhere. I didn't have any money. And then I started teaching immigrants and refugees, and I was very drawn to that work. I think some part of me feels a connection to that refugee experience. I can't explain that, but I've always been very moved by those stories. And so it was really wonderful to work. I did for about 4 years. I worked with refugees from the former Soviet Union, Russian-speaking refugees. And then I also worked with some Chinese refugees, Chinese immigrants, and others. But when I started teaching for CUNY, English as a second language for academic purposes. And then now what I do is I work with teachers. So I'm like a coach for teachers in a specific program. I work at the central office, but I'm working in a program called CUNY Start, which is for students who didn't really get enough preparation to take college courses for a number of reasons. Maybe just poverty, not very good schools, they didn't get any advisement. And then they find that they're at a community college because the community colleges accept everyone who has a diploma. and they aren't really prepared to do the work or in the habit, of working hard and doing a lot of reading and writing. So that's what the program is for, and that's so I work with teachers who are in that program teaching English, basically, academic reading and writing to prepare for college, and they are very committed and very, very talented and wonderful teachers. So I really like my work.
Very, very interesting. You are the author of 5 books of poetry so far. And tell us about how you started writing poetry or being interested in poetry. And the time from writing to publishing, which is a whole different process. How all this happened?
Okay. Well, actually, I was revising my bio, and I realized actually I have 9 books altogether. 5 of them are chapbooks, and 4 of them are full-length books. So I just put them all into the revised bio. But sorry. Let's see, how did it get from writing to publishing? Well, I always wrote as a child. I wrote what I thought were, I wrote stories, and I also wrote songs. I was just always writing songs. I didn't know that to me, they were like pop songs that didn't have music. Because I didn't really grow up in a very intellectual or artistic environment. And so I didn't really know that there were living poets, that poetry was something you could do in the modern world. So I spent many years in adolescence writing, song lyrics and thinking maybe I can find someone who can play them and sing them. And then it wasn't really until the last few years of high school and college that I found out about writing workshops, and that you can share your poetry with other people, get comments, and make it better. So I started doing that in college, and I happened to have a really great workshop teacher who was very enthusiastic about the poems I was writing. So that gave me a lot of confidence to keep going. And then I went to an MFA program at the University of Iowa right after college. And then when I moved to New York, I basically just didn't write. I just stopped writing for probably 10 solid years, because I just had I had a crisis of confidence. I was overwhelmed by how unsophisticated I was. I met so many interesting, smart people. I was just surrounded by this incredible city with all these talented people. And I think I just thought, okay, I just can't do this. It's not, I'm not good enough. And I just kind of didn't let myself, it wasn't so much a block as just not letting myself go there. So I really had to, grow up a little bit and come to terms with, failure, and that it's okay to fail and to just keep writing, and that the recognition that I would be happier if I kept writing no matter what, even if I didn't publish. And then, that'll slowly, you get better, you keep doing it and you get better. And so getting some publications gave me that confidence, and also the feeling that I had the right to be a poet, and I didn't have to care what other people thought about that.
So, but all this time you kept reading poetry and writing your own poetry. Some of the poets that have inspired you, or they gave you some kind of bringing back the will to continue writing poetry? Have some influences you can mention? And also Greece, which is such a small country with a few million people, 10 million people now. It has two Nobel Prizes, and both are in poetry. Are you aware of Greek poetry?
Somewhat. I guess so. But thinking about the poets who really inspired me when I was sort of having a hard time writing, and who I would suggest to other writers who are starting out, I think I would say Neruda, because just for the joy of his poems. I would say, Robert, I really love Robert Haas's translations of the Japanese haikus, the three haiku masters. I think it's really amazing how he translated those. I am a big fan of a poet named D. Nurksey. He was at one point the Brooklyn Poet Laureate, and he has many books, but one of the books that I really love of his is called Voices Over Water, and it's also kind of an immigration story told in the voices of his family members, of ancestors. I really love those poems that are told in other voices, and I like to try that. Sadly, I haven't found, the Greek poet that I really connect to. I mean, other than the, like Euripides, Medea, the translations of some of those ancient writers, I find really powerful. But no, I haven't really connected with any contemporary Greek poets. So I would love to have some recommendations.
As you said that you mentioned reading poetry in translation. Is translation a good possibility? It is necessary? What do you think? Can we bring the same feeling or the same meaning of the words from other languages to English?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think a super frustrating activity because you never can quite capture those sounds of the other language, those, like when there's a really wonderful and surprising rhyme in the language you're translating from, and you try to bring that in English. From my own experience, it doesn't work as well. But I know people who are great at it, and they have to make some changes. They have to make choices that maybe that rhyme won't be there, but there will be some other parallel sound, some other kind of music. I think it's really fun to look at like a poet who writes in English. I have a book that I bought in Italy. It's Charles Simic in English and in Italian, and I find it really fun to look at the two side by side and sort of examine what the translator chose to do, or like as an exercise, cover the English, cover the original Simic poem. His name is maybe Simic. I'm not sure how he pronounces it, and try it, and see how close I get to that obviously better translation that's in the book. But so I think translation, and I also know the Elsa Ferrante, Elena Ferrante books that have been so popular. A lot of people say that the translation is better than the book. You know, that the translator found a way to make it even better. So I think that can happen too. So I'd like to learn more about translating, and I'm sure, you know, there are probably workshops about it. I've also tried to listen to tapes and CDs of Greek, of modern Greek, just to, you know, hear the sounds. But I unfortunately, you know, have a full-time job and haven't had a lot of extra time to do that. But I hope to, like, when I retire, spend some time with the Greek. Because one thing is that to go to Greece, I would really want to be able to speak some Greek. You know, I wouldn't want to just be there totally speaking English. Even if I could have a very small conversation, that would be so much better than being there just as an American who only speaks English.
Yeah. Very, very interesting, because in the States we are, you know, notoriously monolingual, and studies show that what is being translated into English from the world literature, it's a little bit more or less than 2%. So you see that we have a very limited access to other languages and other literatures in English. So what you said about the interest in translation is it is very important at this moment in a very multicultural society like the American society. So starting from the latest one and going back, let's hear some of the titles of your poetry books, and if you have some stories to tell, you know, short for a few minutes for each one, the conditions under which they were written, some of other things you like to add. To start from the latest and going back to your first publication.
Sure. Well, the latest.
And if you have any favorite one, any favorite book, if you favor one book, because I hear poets say that, well, the oral children will love them equally, but sometimes, you know, it is some kind of favoritism, more, I don't know, some factors or reasons that make some books more likable than others.
Yeah. I guess I always tend to like the most recent one the best, but so my most recent one is Animals in English, and it's you can see it. It's poems after Temple Grandin. So I wanted to sort of try on her voice, and I loved the fact that she was translating for us, translating animal language, animal perceptions, and the way animals see the world. She was translating that for humans, and I just wanted to kind of take that another step and make it translating Temple Grandin's ideas and some of her language into free verse poems. So I had a lot of fun writing it. I mean, there are some very dark topics about slaughter and the way we treat animals, but she speaks in a very straightforward, right to the point way, and so I tried to bring that make that part of that voice, part of what these poems are, and then at the same time she's telling the story of, well, I'm telling her story of growing up, which was very difficult growing up, and I had some emotional connection to that because I had some issues growing up as well, as we all do. But so I'd say at the moment, this is my favorite book. I think that there were times when I was just completely like in a trance when I was writing it because just of the wealth of language and just the names that she uses for these different instruments and way she describes the animals, it almost seemed like the book was writing itself at times. So that was really nice. But I think with all the books, you know, when I put together the list of poems, or not the list, but I put together in one document all the poems that I read, that I chose to read. And I think that's my favorite, you know, is when you can take the best ones from each book and put them together and sort of see the connection among them. It was also fun to write The Silent Bee, which is also kind of like my book, The Inclination to Make Waves, in that it's started from this premise of I'm going to use these 4-letter words and I'm going to just delve into the words' meanings and make connections. And so similar thing happened with the chapbook, The Silent Bee, you know, looking at words like dumb and numb, and sack, slab, just looking at those really monosyllabic English words and trying to explore, you know, what are the associations, what narratives can we pull from these. I had a lot of fun with the book of 4-letter words, but I don't think it's my best book. I think it's uneven. I think there are some really good ones in here, but maybe I carried it too far with trying to have, you know, 51 pages of 4-letter word poems. Some of them feel a little bit more forced. The first chapbook that I published was called The Orange Juice is Over. And that was actually a line that my husband said often whenever we were out of orange juice. He would just say, the orange juice is over. And so I liked the quality of that sort of wrong use of the idiom, you know, not being out of orange juice, but it being over, and it sort of had the implication of the relationship being over if the orange juice is over. So he definitely inspires me with some of the ways that he uses English. And I also really liked the Sweet Flag chapbook because it allowed me to explore, I think more than any other book, Greek, you know, the Greek landscape, Greek folklore, some Greek words, not to explore so much my own Greek identity, but aspects of life there, because through trees and plants, so much of what we know about herbs and plants goes back so far and has a lot of rich, you know, history in Greece. So I also loved writing that book for being able to find out more about the world of herbs and all the folklore that goes with that.
Tell us a few things about the writing process. How do you write? It has to be day, night. You use paper, computer, pen, pencils, and also in this process there are drafts. Is rewriting an important part of your work?
Yeah, I do a lot of drafting. When I write a draft, I write it on just unlined paper, not in a notebook. I really don't like those nice notebooks that people give you, you know, the beautiful notebook. It's just perfect. It has a beautiful cover. I'd hate that because I could use that for work, but I cannot use that for writing because I don't want to see all my messy scribblings in a beautiful notebook. You know, I want them just to be on a separate piece of paper that I like to rip it. After if it gets that far, whatever was written on the paper, if it gets to the computer and gets typed, I tend to rip that and throw it away. I don't like to look at the old drafts. So that's kind of a funny thing. It's just like some kind of ritual. Let me get rid of this one. And then sometimes I just rip them and they don't ever make it to the computer. But I like to write at night. I don't wake up early and start my day by writing. I like to kind of write in those, like in the margins, in those moments of like, I have 30 minutes, I have 30 minutes by myself and don't have anything that I have to do. Let me just see what I can do in 30 minutes and just give myself that kind of, time limit and just see what happens. And then as opposed to like having the whole day, which I rarely do anyway. And I like to drink wine. So drinking wine while writing can be very helpful, I've found. It can sort of allow me to be a little bit looser and to, just go with an idea that I won't be so critical of myself when I have my glass of wine with me.
So it is some kind of discipline or a process that involves discipline or as you said, half an hour now and then another day, another half an hour. So it is some kind of routine and rituals you try to develop. And also you read other works at the same time. It is writing and reading related in that process of your own writing.
Yes, definitely. I'm always, getting books in the mail from other poets or something I ordered from Amazon. So whatever. Also journals. I find I can sit down and look through a journal and see. I can read some things that I'm not crazy about, but then find something. Oh wow, this is really interesting, and that can inspire. So that's definitely part of the process. Is starting to read. Sometimes it's good to read, I find, journals, from literary journals or from work of friends, rather than someone great, who's just great. Because that can sort of shut me down. Oh, this person is so fantastic. I don't want to write, So I like to look at things that aren't perfect, that maybe could use another edit, and that gives me a little bit more courage to put something down on the page that doesn't have to be perfect.
For several months now, we are under lockdowns or this the scare or the protection we the protocols we keep, either as employers or as individuals regarding the pandemic. How the pandemic has affected your work, your creative work, your poetry and writing, employment, and also the personal, the family interactions there.
Yeah, it's been depressing and anxiety inducing in many ways, not being able to live a real life and not being able to travel, not being able to go to other countries. We definitely feel frustrated and irritated, but other than that, nothing terrible has happened within, my family or my work situation, other than I feel very sorry for the students who need more attention and can't really do well online. But in terms of writing, I think it's been beneficial in that it's given me more time to just be a little bit more focused and do one thing at a time. and sort of notice things in the neighborhood, when I go to the park. You know, I've seen animals that I never knew or, you know, lived in Brooklyn, or visited Brooklyn, just by, you know, slowing down and noticing, which I never would have been able to do if I'd had my regular schedule of commuting. And I mean, I feel nostalgic about commuting. I would like to be on the subway again. I'd like to be among crowds of people. But you know, I saw an egret in the park. I saw a Cooper's hawk. Those things have come into the poems too. Yesterday, a couple days ago, I saw 4 raccoons crossing the water in the lake in Prospect Park, one at a time, swimming super fast. I had never noticed these raccoon families. So those things are also, being able to slow down and observe has helped me think through some poems. So I guess that's, you know, and, you know, I've been trying to use a camera. So, I mean, I've always been very attracted to images and poems, strong images, and trying to use a camera is both trying to capture a strong, clear image that maybe can also be in a poem, but it's also the process of learning something new, which I think feeds into writing more and being more productive in general.
Also, we have experienced new movements, especially the movement against racial inequality, and of course the brutal behavior by certain you know, authorities against minorities and African Americans. How do you see this issue within the American society, the issue of racism? Do we have systemic racism? And you, as a white female of a Greek background, growing up in the Midwest, you had any experiences of discrimination at some point?
I definitely think that we have systemic racism. I think it's like a huge problem. I think it's, I'm glad that, you know, Black Lives Matter is getting more attention, being taken more seriously, and that white suburban women, you know, are now also protesting and wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts. I think, I mean, it's not just about the t-shirt, but I'm glad that maybe the pandemic has also brought it to more to the fore, that the incredibly unequal and brutal treatment by the police. I mean, the police, it's clear, you know, from all these videos that we have a big problem with the way law enforcement operates and discriminates, even against children, even against young girls, you know, even against, you know, in an outrageous way. They need to be, there need to be some restrictions put in place on their behavior and the way they don't seem to have any repercussions for the crimes that they commit. So I totally support the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think, you know, I think I've been I didn't grow up in a privileged way, so it's hard for me sometimes to see myself as privileged, because it wasn't an easy growing up. Didn't have a lot of support from my parents, and for a long time I think I thought, well, that I'm not necessarily privileged, but now I get that. Now I get it. It's helped me. This movement has helped me understand that actually, just because of the way I look, I have a lot of privilege. You know, that just looking, you know, white skin, blue eyes. No cop has ever given me a hard time. Never, I've never had any difficulty. I can walk into a campus. No security guard ever wants to see my ID because I'm white. That's clear to me. That so I haven't felt I haven't ever felt the discrimination or certainly not about being a Greek American. The kind of discrimination that I think my father was very real for my father and for my aunt when they were growing up. And it's interesting. Like my aunt went to college. I saw her yearbook from college recently, and the way that they described her was is kind of the way a Black person might be described today. They called her, one of the words they used was exotic, which, I've learned from my Black friends, maybe don't use that word because it's sort of implying that that person's a stranger in this country or an alien in this country, whereas you, the white person, are not, because you're not exotic. So I found it very interesting that she was described, and both my parents, both my father and my aunt were actually fairly dark-skinned, and so they did get treated in a different way, and they did get called exotic, and people would ask them where they were from, even though they had these completely American accents. So there was that, and even some members of my family who are more olive-skinned have had some encounters, like my brother has had encounters with security guards where they're asking him what he's doing there. And so I do see how, just being fair-skinned it saves you from this kind of abuse, which is so ridiculous. So I hope I didn't ramble too much of it.
No, very interesting, because you bring, sociologically speaking, the concept of Orientalism to create the exotic other, which is a whole process, and the Americanization movement that the early immigrants had to go through in order to escape discrimination. Of course, the Greeks, for many, many decades, they suffered a lot of discrimination in the States, in Omaha, in Nebraska, and other places. They were attacked or killed because, as you said, the skin wasn't exactly super white. It was ambivalent. Because you work with immigrants now, do you see some similarities as far as concerned their hopes and prospects? Is still the same idea, immigrants catching the American dream as the previous waves of immigrants from other countries and other languages had, or you see somehow it's a different kind of approach to be a new immigrant. And of course, still all these anti-immigration issues that we suffer the past few years with the political administration that we have. You see any similarities or difference between current day immigrants and previous generation of immigrants?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I know students who work many long hours, in a laundromat or overnight as a security guard, and not all of them, but some of them manage to also take their college classes and study engineering, and they just were from the outset, determined to do that, and suffered. I mean, it was hard, very hard, to not sleep, to not eat, but to keep going. So I do see that determination. I've seen that. Especially, I think it's easier for men a lot of the time to do that. I think it's harder. I have also seen women immigrants who, are up against a lot. You know, their husbands or families don't want them to go out and study. They don't want them to go out and be part of a class where they don't know the people. So I see especially the women who from Muslim countries who are, you know, wearing head coverings. I think is much harder for them to separate their studies from their home life obligations. So, and that reminds me a little bit of my aunt and my grandmother. She didn't really have a chance, my grandmother, to study English. You know, I think she wanted to attend classes in the evening, and I think her family said, you know, we're not going to allow you to go out by yourself in the evening. So I see those connections too, how there are amazing success stories of people who just will not give up and will keep studying, will make it through, get their degree, and you know, be the pride of their families. But I also see, especially for the women, just not only Muslim women, also, you know, women, for example, from the Dominican Republic or from Mexico, that they just have so much more to take care of at home. They have so much more of that responsibility, and just finding the time is really hard for them. Just because, you know, it's a sexist world, and even more so for immigrants.
Recently, with the Black Lives Matter movement, there is a focus or a revival of young Black poets. And it is a sentiment of what they say, that poetry can be used as a tool for change. Do you think that poetry can achieve any change as far as concern issues regarding racism and politics or the economy?
Yeah, I think poetry can change our minds. I think poetry can help us see how other people live and understand and see their humanity and see their struggles. I think, you know, unfortunately, not a lot of people are tuned into poetry, and poetry is difficult, so it's just not going to ever be, you know, like Twitter. It's never going to be a popular medium, because it just requires a little bit more work and difficulty. There's difficulty, but you know, I was reading Wanda Coleman, who's a poet, a Black woman poet who died probably maybe 10 years ago. She she grew up in poverty in Los Angeles, and she didn't really start writing poems until she was, publishing, until she was an adult. And what she did was she actually imitated a lot of wrote sort of, you know, homages or imitations of some white male poets that are quite good, quite skillful. So she's a very skillful poet, but she's also a poet who shows you the world that her reality that she was living in 1970s Los Angeles as a Black woman, you know, paying the bills, you know, trying to get the clothes for the children. Reading her, I think, made me really see what it was, you know, what it is to be a Black woman, a mother, and trying to write. And then her skill at sort of poking fun at some of these great, you know, like John Berryman. She has a great sort of imitation / homage to him. Was really eye-opening for me. I had never read her. She was not someone I knew about when I studied poetry in school. But I think she's somebody who could when you can see the reality of that person's life, and also she used a lot of humor, which I think is always an effective way to really draw people in. If you can bring in humor and show the the great suffering in the situation, that's something that I really admire in poetry generally. So I don't know about poems on Twitter necessarily changing how a lot of people see things, but I do see, yeah, poetry is definitely a vehicle for helping us love people who are not like us and helping us connect to them.
Some people argue that awards, they have no value, and other people argue differently, that awards are important as a recognition. Recently we had the announcement of the Nobel Prize in Literature, and we have an American female poet. We have Louise Klug getting that award. Has any significance for American poetry or for female American poetry? What is your thoughts about the recent Nobel Prize?
Yeah, I was surprised. She was surprised too, she said, just because she is a white woman in America, and right now other countries are not looking very favorably on us because for very good reasons of our horrible government. But I have always admired her. I think she's, I do think she's a genius, and interestingly, she uses a lot of Greek myth in her work. So that's something to go back to and look at again. But I think she has that rare talent of being able to use just quotidian, banal details of the day and turn them into something that feels archetypal, or feels like it could be true in any era across time and across culture. So I do think she's wonderful. I remember reading one. She was one of the first poets that somebody recommended I should read, and when I did start reading her when I was young, I absolutely just couldn't write after I read her, because she was so good that she just made me not feel inspired to write. So I guess there's that double edge. But I also think she does have a lot of humor in her poems that may not really jump out at the reader. So I'm happy about that. I'm happy that that America can have a female poet laureate.
And of course, she's also a New Yorker, which is
Nobel Prize winner, I meant to say. Yeah.
Yes, he's a New Yorker. Are you optimistic about the post-pandemic era? It's coming soon, and things are gonna, come back to a certain normality again, or will move towards a more authoritarian situations. The state imposes more their rules and orders.
Yeah, I want to be optimistic. I was so shocked and devastated by so many of the things that have happened over the past 4 years. I mean, that I didn't really imagine could ever happen. But you kind of see how what's happened to many other countries, where how dictatorships begin and how they get their power, and how on the one hand, being American, you feel like, oh, that can't happen here because we've always had democracy, blah, blah, blah. But then you see how the institutions get eroded. The institutions don't have credibility anymore. everybody, if one person is corrupt, well, we're all that attitude of there's corruption everywhere, everyone's equally corrupt, which I think is really so damaging. I'm hopeful in the sense that, I mean, I think there will be tons of work to do if we can get Trump out of office, to restore these institutions and to restore the sort of norms and standards that we had before. But I do think there's so many smart people. There's so many smart, dedicated, committed people who want a change, and those people cannot. I trust, that all these people who are pushing for voting registration and doing the logistical work to help make the voter turnout happen. We have so many good minds. It can't all be, destroyed. But I do see it's been a lesson in how a country falls apart, and lots of countries and empires have fallen apart, and it's bound to happen, here too, at some point. I just hope it's not going to be now. But yeah, it's weird. It's just made me feel how very fragile the whole, how what holds us together is so fragile and can fall.
What about CUNY? CUNY is a major public institution that has been under attack for several years now. Will it survive?
Yeah, CUNY has been through a number of scandals and has not been treated well by Cuomo. I mean, I think CUNY will survive. I think it's going to be a rough few years with all these layoffs and fewer services for students who really need them. But I'm proud that it's a great public institution, and we're still doing a lot of good work, even though it's compromised right now by COVID and other things. But yeah, I'm optimistic about CUNY's future.
In your concluding remarks, tell us what you can recommend to poets who start now writing or publishing about Americans of Greek descent, and your concluding remarks for the community, for New York, for CUNY, for poets.
I mean, I guess I'd say, read a lot of poets, read the translations, read the English and look at the original language. For Greek American poets, learn Greek, even though I have not followed my own advice. But, if you're young, start learning Greek and start learning to appreciate, the sounds and the words. It's still on my agenda to do in the future. But that's something something I wish I'd had in childhood, that language to have in the home, a home language and another language for public. And I would say just read poems that are fun, that give a sense of delight, that can be comic, because I think that's a way to combat all the anxiety and see the possibilities there's the heaviness that we're all under right now, and then the heaviness of our own self-doubt, but I think comedy brings the tension and brings a balance to poems. So I'm trying to think of other. I'd actually really like you to either here and now, or maybe you can send me an email. Recommend some poets who where there's a translation on the other side of on the other page for me to experience.
Yes. By all means, of course. Thank you very much, Hilary. That was a really very, very pleasant and interesting interview. Thank you for sharing the stories, your personal stories, your family stories, and your thoughts about current events, and of course, poetry. Maybe we can leave this interview having your voice reading one of your poems that you like, and conclude our interview with one of your poems.
Oh, okay.
Of course, we have your own voice reading your poetry in our website, in the hapsos.org. But it's good to leave this interview with one of your poems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I will read. It's a love poem to my husband from when we first met early on in our relationship, when we were speaking kind of an in between English. No, at that time when we met, we were speaking English, but at some point it moved to be not exactly English, not exactly Italian, something in between. So it sort of captures that feeling. This is called My Italian. Every toe's a finger, every clock's a watch, a pillow's pilaf. Think of sleeping on a bed of rice. Still means always, as in Shakespeare. Who wouldn't prefer piazza to square, topi to mice, and mezzaluna to deep south? I love the ups and downs, the vowels I'll never get my mouth around, and no fruit's sweeter than the watermelon he calls cucumber.
Thank you very much. Hilary Sideris, an interview at the Hellenic American Project Diaspora Center.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored. I'm honored to be here. Nice, very nice talking to you.